It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to reintroduce you to Graham Wilson, the director of the Initiative on Cities. He's joined by Mayor Karl, the former mayor of Nashville and former mayor in residence with the Initiative on Cities. And we're also joined today by Mayor Ethan Strimling, the mayor of Portland, Maine. Elected in 2015, Mayor Strimling has set out to make Portland a leader in immigrant inclusion and integration. And these three gentlemen are going to speak with us today about the perspective, the mayor's perspective from the mayor's office on the value of immigrant inclusion in cities. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to have both the mayors with us today for this conversation. You've already met Mayor Dean, and I've already had the pleasure of introducing him today. Mayor Strimling has just fought his way through the traffic on Starrow Drive to get here. We appreciate very much him coming down from Maine to do that. Portland is a wonderful city. If you haven't had the chance to visit, I urge you to do so. It has great restaurants, great brewery, and great scenery. It's a great jumping off point for exploring New England. And so,
great cultural diversity and immigration.
One of the things that I should say is that whereas Mayor Dean was mayor for 8 years, and as a political scientist, I don't really like term limits, and I can explain that at enormous length if you want me to, but I really don't like term limits, and it seems to me that term limits in this case prevented Nashville continuing with a very successful mayor. Mayor Strimling, in contrast, is relatively new to the mayorship. He's been there about 18 months, right?
6 months.
Six months. Oh, even less, right.
I know it looks like 18.
Okay, but Mayor Strimling has worked on this type of issue for much longer before he went into city government. So his great experience of issues related to immigration, even though he's been in the mayorship for a much shorter length of time. I think one of the things that links these cities is a theme that we've talked about a great deal over the last day or so, and that is that cities which don't have a long history of immigration are cities that now have very significant immigrant populations. And in Boston, for example, we had about 27% of the population being foreign-born. And of course, in Boston, we have a long, important history of immigration and the challenges and the discrimination. The famous or infamous signs, I should say, "No Irish need apply," going back to the 19th century. But in Nashville and in Portland, the mayors have been building a culture of inclusion in cities that don't have that same sort of folk memory of immigration and the challenges that lots of different groups went through over the decades of American history. Just as we heard yesterday about building a culture of inclusion in a German city, where in Germany, as in France or Britain, there is not the same culture as in the United States of saying we were all immigrants once. So I want to start out, mayors, by talking about how do you set the lead as a mayor for a city? How do you create that climate of being a welcoming, inclusive city? Mayor Strimling, would you like to start on that?
Sure. Thank you for having me down here today. It's great to be here and be part of this, despite the traffic on Starrow Drive. It's always nice to come down and talk about these issues. How do you be a leader on the issue? I think what you have to be able to do is really try to hear your community. What's happened in Portland, for those who don't know, is while Maine is one of, if not the whitest state in the nation, Portland is very much not that. And it is almost exclusively because of immigration. Equally important to that conversation is that of the 70,000 or so people who are in Portland proper, not the area, but in Portland proper, over 10,000 of our residents are foreign-born. And this has really grown dramatically over the last 20 years. And as you've seen this block of people begin to grow and begin to contribute to your economy and begin to really transform your community, you can't do anything but recognize you've got to try to find ways to incorporate them more into the governing process and put structures in place to help people move through the system, because while 10,000 people are foreign born in the city of Portland, those 10,000 also have the highest poverty rates, also have some of the highest unemployment rates, and that's a lot because we have not been inclusive enough on the incorporation side. How do we bring people into our system? We don't have any sort of direct single source. You can go to Catholic Charities. I ran a place called Learning Works. We worked with immigrants in English language classes. There's a lot of different services around the community, but a central location we didn't really have. And so that's why one of the initiatives I put forth in this campaign when I ran in the fall was to create an Office of New Americans. And we have begun the process now of putting the seed funding in place so that we can ultimately, hopefully within a year, actually have a full-fledged office that can focus on the economic development of our immigrant and refugee community. I think what we have recognized, what the city hopefully has recognized, is that if we didn't have these 10,000 foreign-born, our population would be plummeting, right? We were 65, 66,000, we're now 67, 68, but again, 10,000 of those people, we would be closing elementary schools, businesses would not be able to find employees. It is really the lifeblood, as it has been for generations in Portland, whether it was the Irish or the Jews or the Italians, whomever was coming forward. The big difference now, of course, becomes around skin color. We may get into more of that, and where discrimination rises or becomes much more volatile than perhaps in some of the generations in the past. But for us, I think being a leader is really about recognizing the strength of what we have in the community and trying to put forward some initiatives that can greater incorporate it.
Well, I think it's a good point you make about, Graham, about the different parts of the country have really arrived at the immigration issue later than others. And Nashville would be a classic example of a city that probably had not thought a lot about and had not seen a lot of immigration in the decades before the 1990, let's say. I'm actually grew up in a small town 60 miles west of here named Gardner, Massachusetts, which is the chair capital of the world, and I can almost guarantee you these chairs were made in Gardner. And it was a city that had lots of relatively sort of 20th century immigration. Lots of Polish people, lots of French Canadians, and ethnic food and ethnic influences were everywhere. I then went to college in New York City, which of course is this incredible melting pot, and every food choice, every cultural choice is all there. And then moved to Nashville in 1978, where I ended up staying to go to law school. And my first real sense in Nashville was almost that there was this lack of ethnic food, a lack of ethnic diversity that you see mostly in the Northeast. And that began to change, and it changed very slowly. I think people began to feel that the city was changing in terms of its diversity, in terms of ethnicity, in the 1990s when there was sort of a large influx of Latinos to Nashville. But to put it sort of in the best way to me would be that over the last 10 years, essentially, Nashville has gone from approximately 2% or less foreign-born citizens to 12%. And so it's been a considerable growth. And that was occurring before I became mayor. It was going on, and it sort of ramped up a lot afterwards. And in my mind, it was a good thing. And certainly I was hearing a lot from urbanists you'd hear speak or things you would read about how the strong cities were going to be the cities that attracted people, had diversity, were cities that were places of creative energy. And I thought immigration was all part of that. And so when I became mayor, I knew it was an issue that we were going to have to and should work on. But it began, as I said in my opening remarks this morning, essentially with a negative effort, which was this English-only vote. And the one thing I had mentioned about the English-only vote was that occurred in '09, which is sort of the depths of the recession. And I think that created some of the atmosphere that made that possible. But it was interesting to see the different forces come together to oppose it, and for a variety of reasons. First was this sense that it is just not who we are as a people. The city has always been a friendly place. We would argue that we're the friendliest place in the United States. It's a city that has an economy that is based significantly on the convention business, tourism. And if you're in that business, you certainly don't want to project that you're not an open, friendly place. You want to project the exact opposite. And so you had this reaction where this is not who we are in a spiritual sense. It's not who we are in the way we treat other people. But it's also not who we want to be in terms of business. And so the Chamber of Commerce, which I think had been, for me, a good ally on everything, but they took a very strong position saying that a city that shuts its borders, a city that shuts out international business, a city that shuts out international travel, that doesn't produce this workforce that is needed for a city to move forward, is a city that's not going to succeed. And that message really, I think, resonates with people. And as I said, that vote resulted in a landslide where the English-only forces were defeated, and we sort of moved on. And then I think the focus became for us as to how we could develop not only our reputation, but the reality of being a welcoming city. And so that's when we started the New Americans Council, where we invited folks to come to the mayor's office to keep the city informed about issues that were going around in the city that needed to be addressed, concerns that we could address, and out of that, other things developed. One program that I'm particularly proud of is called the Academy for New Americans, which is essentially based on, Nashville has something called Leadership Nashville, and a lot of cities have these leadership programs where citizens are invited to participate for a year or 6 or 7 months, where you learn about the city in detail. And in Nashville, it's a really successful program. It's been going on for 30 or 40 years. And we thought it would be a good thing to have new Americans be invited to participate in a program where they could learn about the government of the city, the businesses of the city, the culture of the city, and be exposed to all sorts of different people. And so we created this class where we had 30 or 40 people participate each time, and they would meet with the mayor, the council, the school director, with the police chief, but also things like public works and water. They would go to different businesses. And it had a lot of appeal, and people liked it. And for me, it was also a way to get people involved in the community to help with sort of the integration politically into the operation of a city. And I would also, I guess, say in its favor of this program is we found it fairly easy to fund. We started it in the mayor's office, but for business leaders, it had a lot of appeal to do this, and the amount of the contributions we're asking for were not substantial. I mean, what you're doing essentially is paying for lunch, maybe paying for some transportation, getting the cost waived to attend a baseball game or to go to the Grand Ole Opry or something, all those costs taken care of. And so it's a very manageable program to get going. Another thing we did that I thought was useful is these New American Corners. Basically, this is an idea. I know John Sabo's here from Los Angeles, the head of the libraries. We essentially stole this idea from John. We got mentioned in a library publication where, for another program we were doing, sort of an honorable mention, and John's program for these corners, where basically the U.S. Immigration Office makes available pathways to citizenship, information you need to become a citizen in public libraries, and we did them in community centers and parks too. And the U.S. Immigration is really happy to cooperate with you and work with you on getting these done. So we, contacted Los Angeles and Chicago. It was also an early city doing this. Got the details on this program and got it up running, and it's turned out to be, I think, a very successful program that hopefully will only continue to be built upon.
Mayor Strimling, I know that you've been pushing for the creation of a new Americans office and that this has been a matter of some controversy. Why the controversy, and tell us more about what you're hoping to achieve by creating that office?
So by creating the office, the most important part of the beginning of this is that when I first proposed it to the council, what I wanted to make sure is that we didn't see this as an office that was going to become more around social services. I wanted this office to be sent to our Economic Development Committee to be become part of our economic development work. A lot of these offices almost always get sent to Health and Human Services because they're seen kind of as some additional added welfare or some kind of hand up, all very important parts, pieces that HHS does well, Health and Human Services does well, but I wanted this to really be around economic development. What is it that we are not doing that we should be doing to help immigrants and refugees in the community gain the skills they need or the contacts they need, the networking, the kind of opportunities that the mayor was talking about here in a much more integrated fashion. If they do need some kind of assistance or housing, that can be referred to Health and Human Services. But their job, just like with any other economic development, would be to help this community gain those networking needs, those economic opportunities, banks, loans, whatever the skills are that you're going to need to start your own business or get the employment that you want. So that was very important at the beginning. And that's where we've just started. So we've held a few hearings. We're beginning the process. We're starting to gather a lot of information. We've got some seed money in next year's budget to really continue this because there are offices of New Americans popping up all around the country. So we want to learn from them and make sure we get this right. And then hopefully by next year's budget, we'll have a more fully fleshed out department. There has been some controversy. And it's controversy that you, working in this work, may recognize and some that may surprise you. Certainly there is some of the controversy out there that says, why are you segregating out? Why not an Office of Economic Development for everybody, which is of course what we already have, but it pretty much only serves those who kind of have the capital, who have the wherewithal, who have the cultural knowledge of where to go. And it doesn't specifically deal with some of the needs within the refugee and immigrant community that are obviously very specific to those communities around language and culture. So we have some of that. But we have also had a bit of a controversy within our communities of color in how inclusive is this office. And some of the long-standing members of our African-American community have stepped forward and said, yeah, we aren't as big, we get that, but we certainly have specific needs. And those needs have been ignored for a long time. And I think that's a very legitimate, absolutely a very legitimate concern. We'd had an Office of Multicultural Affairs, but it was pretty neutered. It had like no staff, half-time, an entire city. You just can't get anything done when you do that. You have to invest the real resources in order to make it work. And so that office, which was really supposed to be kind of serving all communities of color, didn't have the resources and also was really supposed to be serving more African-American communities, some of the Latino community that have been there for a long time in Portland. It had not really shifted its focus over to immigrants and refugees, but it never was able to do much. And so people are feeling very excluded. What was good about that controversy, because at a big public hearing that we had, in which a couple hundred people showed up and probably half of them testified, we did have this divide. And what I think a lot of us took from that, what I certainly took from that, and having conversations with members of the African-American community in particular, but also within the immigrant community, is that we needed to think bigger than we were thinking, to become more inclusive, so that the office is not simply New Americans, but maybe Minority Affairs and New Americans. Somehow to have both, but you can't lose what's very important. You don't want this to become too watered down so that you lose some of the identity. There are very clear needs with the immigrant and refugee community that you have to address. And so if we're going to go big like this, what that says to me is you need somebody who's going to head the department. You need somebody who probably focuses very specifically on immigrants and refugees. You probably need somebody who focuses on long-term impoverished communities of color within the state. We also have a very deep Native American population in Maine and certainly connected to Portland. So we have seen some of this controversy, but we saw it early and are starting to work through it and starting to talk through it, and hopefully we'll be able to create something even bigger. The worst case would be, you know, if we panic and go home and just try to do it as we've done it before. The second worst case would be, and this might even be the even worst case, is we set something up that's doomed to failure because it doesn't have the kind of resources it needs or doesn't have the kind of community support it needs. But I think we can build that community support if we broaden the office, but make sure that it has within it these specific folks who are focused very clearly on certain communities. And look, it may even become more than that, because within the immigrant and refugee community, I'm lumping 10,000 people all into one group, and of course that is absurd, right? We have a tremendous Somali community, we have a tremendous Sudanese community, Burundi, Rwandan, a number of African nations that have been coming in have their own distinct cultural challenges, economic challenges, language challenges, and so we may have to ultimately look at all of them. I don't know that we can create one for every department, but you got to look as broadly as you can.
Thank you. Mayor Dean, how does the mayor make sure that this culture of inclusion is spread across the entire city administration? Probably don't need to tell anybody in this room that city administrations are large, complex organizations, don't necessarily turn on a dime. How do you spread this culture across the whole city administration?
Well, for us, our New Americans office is relatively small, and so the New Americans office would work with other departments and talk about and bring to their attention any issues that that they would see. I think that there has been, particularly in the last couple years, a real concerted effort on part of the city, and Mayor Barry is really pushing this forward, is to look for more diversity in hiring within the city and being more inclusive. You know, I think the thing that you have to do in that area is just make a conscious effort to get that done. But I do think one of the best things about being mayor is that when you say that being an open and welcoming city and being a city that is friendly to the new arrivals in the city, that word does permeate, and by having an office that specific job is to make sure that the city is doing all that it can in that area, you're able to follow through, and you're also a source of contact for the public that may have a question about how one department is reacting or not. A good example would be when President Obama issued his executive order recently. And there was a thought that there would be another pathway to move forward for folks in the United States, that Shauna was able to work with all the different departments to be ready to respond to that. You know, she would call from the mayor's office in New Americans and say, we want to be ready, and we were able to prepare a plan to get that done.
And Ms. Strickland, how does this figure into your I was going to say you're planning, you're up and running, but still comparatively early days in the administration. How are you getting the word out to all the departments and agencies?
It's a long, slow process, and it's one of the most frustrating pieces. You know, you can look up here, we got 3 white guys up here and having this conversation, and that tells you everything you need to know about how much lack of progress we've really made on a lot of these issues. And we are pushing very hard at a lot of levels. We, on the council, we have better diversity on the council now than we've ever had. We do have 2 African-American members of the council. We have our first immigrant who is serving on the school board right now and is planning to run for the council next year. So we're beginning to see a little bit of that sort of, let's begin to shape the top to reflect what the city looks like a little better, and maybe that will help. But as we know, it has to be a conscious effort. It can't simply be sitting back and waiting for people to apply. You have to get out there, just like you do for any job. You go out and recruit the people that you want in that job. I was a CEO for 20 years of this nonprofit, and most of the people that I hired into positions of power, I would go recruit. And you'd leave it open and let people apply to see if somebody came in, but you knew very well what you wanted and who it was. And in that world, you recruit who you know. And you have to be very careful about making sure you remind yourself of who you do know, and you don't just go to your first most easy answer. We, for instance, one quick example, we have a planning board, We had 3 vacancies on the planning board, so they look at zoning and when somebody wants to develop a building. We had 3 vacancies on the planning board, and we sent out a notice that these seats were open and that people could come in and apply. And we left it open for a couple of weeks, and we had very few applicants, all white. And I asked, well, who did this get sent out to in the community? And it turned out, said, oh, well, we send it out to who our partners are in the community, and it gets all over City Hall and city government. The only community partner it had been sent to was the Chamber of Commerce. And we were like, well, no wonder, right? No wonder. And so I asked that we open that process up for another month, get it out into some of the communities that I knew, communities that I was working with, that others were working with. And by the time we were done, we had 30 applicants from all across the city, and we brought in our first members of the planning board from communities of color in the city, and that was great. And that's the kind of process. You just have to be intentional about it. You have to be intentional. That word is so important, intentional.
Ms. Strickland, you mentioned that Maine as a whole is a very white state. It also has an administration, a governor who perhaps wouldn't naturally take the positions that you've taken. Cities are not islands. They have to interact with state governments. They are faced with choices in terms of dealing with the federal authorities. Importantly, for example, role of police in relation to immigration issues. How have those relationships complicated your work in building an inclusive city?
Your relationships with the governor's office, you mean, or
Well,
across
with the
the board?
governor, with the federal authorities, with other layers of government.
There hasn't been much resistance from other layers of government. The city is pretty progressive, so most layers of government will at least talk the right talk and will begin to try to want to do the right thing. But that said, we don't have any firefighters of color, so we got to begin that process. I mean, just none. It's crazy, right? So we're looking at those and saying what's been going wrong for the last 30 years, that we have 10,000 people in this city who were born in a foreign country, and somehow we haven't found one that could be a firefighter. And we have very few on the police force as well. So we look at some of those. But there aren't roadblocks in the sense of people saying we're not going to help with that. The governor's office so far has been okay. I mean, it's a pretty local issue. We don't have a lot. The governor and I don't agree on the time of day, but it's, he and I have a decent enough relationship that we can talk about some stuff. And so we go down this path. He doesn't really get in our way. He's had a pretty contentious relationship with the city in the past. We've tried to reduce that volume because it wasn't helping. We were mostly fighting through the newspapers as opposed to having conversations. And we, like I said, I mean, we really don't agree on much, but we have tried to agree to not get in each other's way in terms of each other's business. And so far that's been okay.
Modine, what was your experience in Nashville?
Well, I would say Nashville is a blue dot in a red sea. And I think the main issue we've had in terms of working with the state is certainly not the governor's office, but I would say the legislature and different parts of the state at times sending out a message that could be perceived as Tennessee not being very welcoming at times, particularly to Muslims. The state has not interfered in any way that I can recall with any specific things that we were doing in the New Americans program. There's no legislation filed saying that we could not have a New Americans program or doing anything sort of to curtail our ability to move the city forward in that direction, which is in contrast to some other things. I mean, there has been a tendency, and particularly I think in the Southeast more than other parts of the country, but it is somewhat of a national trend where state legislatures have been more assertive, particularly when it's dominated by one party and the cities are represented by another party, of saying that cities' responsibilities can be curtailed or cut back. And we have seen that in other areas, which is not a good thing, but we haven't seen it directly in this field. one of the things that I think would be really great for the state of Tennessee would be to allow undocumented students in Tennessee who've met certain criteria to qualify for state tuition in our public universities. And that is something that would help, I think, a goal for both Democrats, Republicans, rural, urban, to see our state producing more college graduates, creating a better workforce, making our city stronger, city and state stronger economically. Now, that measure had been something that for a long time we thought was going to be near to impossible to get done. About a year ago, it came within one vote of passing the state legislature. And it didn't really get a full hearing this time around for a variety of reasons. But that does give me a sense of optimism that the state is moving in the right direction. Thinking about the different issues that divide the state and the cities, I think the immigration area is one where there probably can be areas of common ground. And I was encouraged to hear the remarks this morning about the need for the word about the importance of being welcoming and friendly and seeing your economy grow will emanate out from the cities and maybe have an influence in the suburban and the rural areas. An important thing in the Southeast to remember is that people don't think of the Southeast as a huge immigration area. You heard about Atlanta. Atlanta is one of the most dynamic international cities in the country right now. But the immigration is also occurring in small towns. It's also occurring in rural areas. And I think that's where the biggest challenges are and where the best work can be done in the future.
We've talked about the lead that you can give as mayors. We've talked a little bit about the structures that you can create, like offices of New Americans. I wonder if we could focus on very specific policies. Karl, you talked about the program that you created, the New Americans Academy. If you were to recommend one specific policy, would that be it, or are there other very specific things that you found really worked for making a difference in this area?
Well, number one, I think the most important thing a mayor can do on this particular issue is the tone. I think people actually, when they work through this issue, and we shouldn't underestimate how difficult it is, and we shouldn't ignore that people during tough economic times or during when there's change get nervous. Change is the hardest thing to deal with in politics. And people get nervous about it, and when they see the demographics of their city, their state changing, they understandably just get a little uneasy. But I think that when the tone is set, where people begin to appreciate the fact that this is actually a great thing for them, it's a great thing for their state and their city, that it is good for their economy, that it's going to create more opportunities and make it a better place to live, you got to keep repeating that message. Now, number one, because it's the truth. I mean, it's a good thing to have on your side in this case. It's an accurate statement, and so by saying that and talking about the importance of diversity and talking about the importance of being welcoming, I think that's the most important thing a mayor can do. And then you get support from other people who continue that conversation. I have a real fondness for the library program. I think it's a great thing to work with the Immigration Service on getting this done. I think this academy idea has been a good one. Shauna deserves all the credit for this. But it's something that gets new Americans out into the city. It's not only helping them, but it's helping the people that they're visiting, the organizations they're learning about, because it's broadening their horizons too.
Okay. Ms. Strickland, what is your top priority in terms of specific policies? You've obviously tremendous effort going on to create the Office of New Americans. Are there any sort of tightly focused policies that you think would make a big difference?
Clearly, I think the office is the top priority. There are a lot of smaller pieces that you can do. Hiring is really key. You've got to figure out how to change that dynamic, especially in our schools, but certainly in our city workforce. But if you want to have one thing that I've seen that more than anything else that helps with trying to create the integration that you need just from a pure programmatic place, it's English language classes. I mean, we have waiting lists of hundreds of people who are trying to learn English every day. And you cannot, you're coming from a country, as you know, where you might have been the superintendent of schools, 30,000 kids, bigger, 5 times the school districts of many in Maine, and you can't get a job as a janitor. And oftentimes that begins around language skills. Now, there's a whole lot of other stuff in there. I don't want to pretend there isn't a whole lot of racism, a whole lot of discrimination, a whole lot of cultural problems, all of those issues that my side of the table, as it were, brings to the table. But the bottom line is you got to have language. And there's nothing that I find that immigrants and refugees want more than language skills fast. I think all of us know you get to another country, whether you're on vacation or not, and you wish you knew how to order a cup of coffee, for heaven's sakes. It's like it's the most scary thing about being in another country is you're worried I'm not going to be able to talk to anybody. And imagine if you've just been plopped here and your whole family or only part of your family. I mean, you know those stories. So if there was one thing that if you gave me $1 million, I would put the $1 million into English language classes and teachers and begin to move people through that more quickly so they could get to be able to get a work permit and get employed.
And that's a theme that Mr. Pavkovich talked about in relation to Stuttgart yesterday too, the importance of language training. I want to open it up now for questions and great opportunity for you in this gathering to ask 2 distinguished mayors questions. So over to you.
Just a question. Are you city manager form of government or not?
So we're sort of this combined, we've kind of created this little bit of a mush. So we are a mayor and a city manager. So the mayor is popularly elected, city manager is hired by the council. Basically, the mayor kind of oversees that office. So.
And is that the same for Nashville, or?
No, I'd call it a strong mayor system. Nashville's different in that we're a metropolitan form of government, which means our county and city is combined into one government, so it's a large geographical area, and we have 40 council members. But you got to be jealous about that.
So complexity both directions, because the reason for asking that, it was to what extent the relationship with law enforcement with immigrant communities, is that been a challenge for either of you? Policies, enforcement, action by law enforcement, and how it makes this easier or less easy to be a welcoming community?
Well, certainly there have been challenges with around law enforcement. I think now we're in a pretty good place. I would say our police department has done a good job and is continuing to work in this area of expanding its recruitment. I mean, the number of police employees and officers who can speak Spanish or come from a Latino background has gone up dramatically over the years. They have started certain programs, a program called El Protector that works with communities and helps build up trust and get conversations going, has been successful. They have other work they do, particularly Nashville, I think, has the largest Kurdish population in the United States. That's been an area where the police department has been very involved in developing relationships. I mean, the main issue that I think that comes up for most cities in the area of law enforcement is a trust element. You definitely want the people of the community, whether they're documented or undocumented, to be in a position where they can feel they can turn to the police for protection and for help. And I can't say that in Nashville we have always done that smoothly or we have always done that right, but we have worked on it, and I think we're moving in the right direction in that regards.
That's right.
Yeah, we're doing okay on that front. There haven't been any issues certainly since I've taken office. We do have a pretty progressive police chief. We need more diversity on the force. He gets that. We need more folks who speak more languages on the force to help with some of that. We did have some incidents 5 or 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, where some young folks and some cops got in a little bit of a tully that was really unfortunate. And the police chief at the time, actually a new police chief had just come in So that was actually beneficial, was able to sort of rebuild the relationship. But it, yes. Do you know Jim? He's from, what's that?
Cincinnati PD, that's where I spent most of my career, so he came to Cincinnati.
Yes, he did. I think he came to Cincinnati from us.
Yes,
And now he's
that's
in
correct.
Detroit, I think, anyway.
That's correct.
And he did a very nice job. I mean, he came in, and in that incident in particular, he just understood the dynamic that occurred, and he understood that you need to go down and be clear that that kind of behavior is not okay, but I'm also going to listen to you and try to understand why that happened. And doing a lot of listening is the key. But our police force at the moment, we aren't having a lot of issues there at the moment.
So in my state in southwest Germany, Baden-Württemberg, the mayors are elected for 8 years from the citizens. And we got
like
a
that.
new mayor 3 years ago from the Green Party. And the first appointment with him, he said to me, the former mayor spoke a lot of welcoming culture in the city of Stuttgart. Please, Pavkovic, answer to me how a newcomer realizes that he or she's being welcoming in our city. So for me, it was difficult to answer. We have indicators like culture diversity, cross-culture festivals, and so on. But on the other hand, when you as newcomer have to go to the foreigners office or other offices from the city administration, you don't see this cultural diversity of the city. So for us, it was important to create welcome structures, welcome city for newcomers. Maybe it's similar like your immigrant information corners, but also to have more diversity in the staff, employees of the city administration. So we have this contradiction. We need intercultural competences. We need, at the moment, also with the influx of the refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, people with Arabic and other languages to deal with the people. But we have also the tradition, German administration, Germans only, language only, have no cross-culture competences. So I think it's very important. It's not enough the attitude of top-down from the mayor. You need also a visible diversity in the city administration at all levels.
I think one of the areas we haven't talked much about today so far, but is probably really where the rubber meets the road on this issue of diversity and immigration, is our public schools. Public schools in Nashville, the change there has been very noticeable and very large. We have probably 148 different countries and I don't know how many different languages represented in our public schools. English as a second language is a major part of the curriculum and a major issue for us to get right and to address. But that is really the first level in which most new Americans really interact with the government and the city is through their schools. And so what the schools do is vitally important. We started a program working with the schools, the New Americans Office and the schools, where essentially we look for basically someone to be as a mentor for new immigrant families going into the school system. So we would find a family that had been through the school system for a few years, kind of knew their way around, and connect them up with the new family coming into the school system from a similar country or similar background. And it went so far as the schools would actually buy telephones so that the mobile phones so people could communicate. But that was, I think, a good measure to help break down some of the walls and to make it easier for these families to negotiate and weave their way through a system that is not easy, even if you speak English at times. And I give credit to the schools, because the schools certainly stepped up, put some money into it, have made English as a second language a real focus. I mean, it's absolutely critical to schools succeeding, but they haven't. There's still a work in progress, but they're doing the right things, I think.
Mayor Strickland, this must be an important issue in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, I think the schools are, it is you know, you walk into the schools in Portland and it's like you're walking into the UN. I mean, it's more, I grew up in New York City and these schools are more diverse than what I grew up in. And that's not really reflected much higher. And I think that's part of what you're talking about, what we've been talking about. How do you reflect it all the way through, both so that young people can see somebody who can help them feel like they can, you know, have some level of inspiration to become something more, but also just because of the cultural norms of that. And so we're trying to get that throughout I mean, it's a key point. But the thing I kept thinking of while you were talking is, you know, what are some of the metrics that we kind of have to put in place to know whether we're successful in the end, right? It can't, you know, it's very important that we're more welcoming. It's very important that we have more English language classes. It's very important that we find networking. But at the end of the day, for me, what's going to be the test is, are the rates of poverty lower among our immigrant and refugee communities, right? It almost really ends there, right? Have we started to raise the boats of the immigrant and refugee community at the end of, you know, my first term in 4 years, or 8 years if I run again? And what are we seeing rise? What are the metrics that you put in place? And, you know, when you've been in the, again, when I ran this agency, we had a lot of metrics. You know, how many kids were we getting a GED every year? How many immigrants were becoming citizens? How many could, you know, go up 2 grade levels in their English language classes? Or with elementary school kids that we worked with, you know, who were in 3rd grade but reading at a 1st grade level, how many had moved up a grade level by the time they got to 4th grade? So you have very clear metrics in that world. Trying to create those same clear metrics in government sometimes is very difficult. But for me, around immigrants and refugees, it's really about how do we move the levels of poverty up? When I go into my housing projects, is this the place that I'm only seeing immigrants and refugees? And are they able to get out of the housing projects and actually live integrated in our community?
Mr. Strimling, what proportion of the children in Portland schools are of immigrant families at this point?
Well, at Deering High School, so we have, in the city proper, we have basically 4 high schools, but about 49% of the students at Deering High School are English language learners of some form or another. So it's very, obviously, it's almost 50-50.
So this must be an enormous change for the teachers in schools.
Yes, absolutely. It's an enormous change, and we have begun at some of our high schools to shift our administration a little bit. One little story around it that, you know, when you could talk about policy, we have 2 major high schools in Portland, and one of them is Portland High School, the other is Deering. And 10 years ago, all of the diversity was at Portland High School, and everybody was kind of like, well, that's probably just where they're choosing to go. You know, you can choose whichever school, you know, kind of blinders to what might actually have been going on, until finally actually somebody looked at the curriculum and realized that we had basically put all the English language teachers in that school. And we wondered why we didn't have diversity anywhere else. And as soon as we made that little you know, it was kind of this de facto segregation of how we were setting it up. And as soon as we spread the English language teachers and said they're going to go wherever students choose to go, we began to see that, of course, parents were choosing whatever school they wanted to go to based on what was best for their child, as long as the resources were in the room.
Earlier, Mayor Strimling talked about hiring as a way to improve the relationship. 2 years ago, when Mayor Razia Baraka of Newark, my boss, my deputized, when he came on board, the first thing he did was to create the Mayor's Office of International Relations and Diaspora Affairs. They had a foreign-born African, my humble self, to head that. And then from there, we created the commission, the Diaspora Commissions. And then you have members from the various demographics of foreigners to be members of that office. And then, but the big thing with it was to create, via city ordinance, the Municipal ID Card program. And we allow Municipal ID Card, identity card program, and then we allow the undocumented immigrants to have such cards. So the card is very important in a way, because we have participating banks that have people with those cards can now open bank accounts. So those undocumented immigrants now open bank accounts, and that did a lot to reduce crime amongst the migrant workers, because prior to having the municipal ID card, they were targets of robberies because they were carrying their money around, so the bad guys were attacking them. But the unfortunate part was
they couldn't come to report to us because they were undocumented. They were afraid of coming to the police and that they would be deported. Some of them couldn't speak English also. So, but with the municipal ID card, they opened bank accounts because of the participating banks that we have. We also had the police accept, the Newark Police Department accept those municipal ID cards as a bona fide identity cards. So we built that trust. So now they can come to the city hall, they can go to the police, and the police will accept the card and report and write a report about their crime, and most of the times they solve those problems that they have.
I don't know anything about that. I'm very intrigued. I mean, honestly, when you first said ID cards, I got a little bit like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Making everybody carry a card around. But that sounds like a very interesting idea. I have to look into it. I don't know anything about.
We can work with you and coach you how to do that.
Okay.
Was that an idea, Nadine, that you ever?
The city does. We did not issue ID cards, and it was something that's been discussed, and I'm not sure where it stands right now.
I think we've time for about one more question.
Hi, I'm the Director of Education at a nonprofit here in Boston, and I'm very aware of the need for English language classes, and I'm just wondering what the solution is for that. We don't have state funding for our English classes. We have some city funding, and we don't have, my organization doesn't have the huge long wait list because we don't have that particular funding. But we can only serve so many people. I know that for some reason among foundations, ESOL is not particularly popular. And so what can be done?
Ms. Strimling, how are you solving that problem?
Haven't solved it yet, but I will tell you that I had the exact same experience. This agency I ran for 20 years, people talk the talk around wanting immigrants to learn English, whether you're right, left, center. Look, honestly, especially on the right? Everybody ought to learn English. But they will not put their money where their mouth is. And actually, it was one moment where the governor and I actually were able to come together because he was somebody who was like, everybody ought to learn English. And he actually grew up French and had to take the college admissions in French. Very smart man, but he couldn't, in English, couldn't do it, had to take it in French. So he's got some connection to this need to be able to get English language skills. So he was willing to invest some money. We built a public-private partnership. But I was very frustrated because everybody would talk the talk, but nobody would put money into it. And I don't understand why. It's probably some of it is it's a long process to get somebody to learn the language, so it's harder to see some of those more immediate results. But you know, it's always a lot easier to raise money for elementary school kids because everybody wants to pay for elementary school kids. And honestly, I'd just find a way to siphon a little bit of that money off and try to fund the other programs. So, because literally every year we would just find a way to fund it. But I don't have an answer, but I do think the municipal governments, especially if it's important enough to the city, we ought to be investing. We do have an adult ed program that's got a lot of people in it, and it's a very effective program that's teaching English every day, but it needs a lot more resources.
Nadine, did you?
I would agree with all that's been said. I mean, again, I think schools are an area where, again, that's happening every day. It's a huge part of the school's budget is dealing with English as a second language. Nonprofits have done a lot of good work, but it's not an area that has been funded nearly to the capacity that exists for people who want that program.
Ms. Strimling, Nadine, any concluding comment you want to leave people with?
Well, I guess I would just conclude with, I do think it's important that this is a good message, that it is a good thing for a city to be open and welcoming, and it can be a nonpartisan issue. The mayor of Nashville and the council in Nashville is elected nonpartisanly. We don't have parties when it comes to local elections, which I think is a good thing. But you know, actually my favorite line that I used to quote a lot was from Ronald Reagan, who would talk about the city on the hill, which is relevant here in Boston. And he would always talk about the city on the hill, which he would describe, as being a city that was strong, a city that was teeming with commerce. And he would say that there'd be walls around it. But if there had to be walls, he said, there'd be doors, and that anybody who had the strength to get there, the desire to be there, could come in. And I think that's just like the best vision and portrait of what cities should be. It should be a place that is teeming with commerce, that is welcoming and open, and that anybody who can get there and is willing to do that work is welcomed. And that's a message that I think every American, whether they live in the North, the South, the East, or the West, Republican or Democrat, Libertarian or otherwise, would agree with.
Matt Strimling.
That's a beautiful way to end. I'm going to leave it on his note. That was great.
I just have to say, as a very professorial thing, that sometime I urge you all to actually read that sermon, the City on the Hill sermon, because it's actually rather different from the way that politicians quote it. It's not saying, we're the greatest, we are the city on the hill. No, he did a beautiful job. I was thinking perhaps of the person he quoted. And what the sermon actually says is that unless we do a good job, including a good job of looking after each other, God is going to punish us. And you better watch out. So I urge you to actually read the sermon, and it will encourage you in some of the values of caring for each other that have been expressed today very, very capably and very movingly by Mayor Strimling and by Mayor Dean. So thank you both so much for participating in this conference, and Mayor Dean for shaping it.